I didn't know her, but I feel like I am her. We all have little girls in this neighborhood, and we should be protecting our kids. And I just wish I knew her. I wish I could have done something.
So to hear that this happened to a little girl in this beautiful neighborhood was devastating. And honestly, I had a hard time comprehending that that could happen down the street from where I raised my kids.
Missy Mogle knew she was going to die. She was barely 5 years old, and her small body bore quiet signs of what she had endured. The officer who entered the bedroom that morning would later say it was the first time in his career he had to step outside just to breathe. The scene spoke volumes, not through violence, but through silence, and the way her tiny fingers curled inward, as if bracing for something. But what stunned everyone wasn't just the neglect. It was how many adults had known something was wrong, and yet she had been left alone. The surveillance cameras in that house weren't there for security. They were there to document something much darker, something you wouldn't believe if it hadn't been captured on hours of video. And when investigators began reviewing the footage, even the most experienced among them struggled to watch. You'll hear later how many times this little girl asked for help, but by the time anyone really listened, it was too late to change the outcome. This isn't just a case of parental failure. It's a failure of every system designed to protect children. A child protection network that missed every flashing red light. A justice system that opened the door and handed her back to the people who would end her life. There were signs. There were reports. There were chances to save her. And each one was wasted. Her name was Missy. And this is not just her story. It's a warning. Because if a child can be lost despite being seen, heard, and reported, then no child is truly safe. A gentle but firm warning before we continue. This documentary involves a deeply troubling case of child neglect and systemic failure. While we will present it with care and avoid disturbing imagery, the subject matter may be emotionally difficult for some viewers. To our new viewers, thank you for joining us. Please consider subscribing and letting us know where you're watching from. It truly helps us understand and reach others who care about protecting vulnerable children. To our returning subscribers, those of you who have liked, shared, or commented on our videos, thank you. You are helping bring these untold stories into the light. Missy Mogle was born on December 31st, 2019, in Florida. From the beginning, she was described as bright, expressive, and unusually empathetic for her age. But behind her early smiles was a family dynamic already strained. Her biological mother, Chloe Mogle, was just 17 at the time of Missy's birth. Unprepared for the demands of motherhood, Chloe left the day-to-day parenting to her own parents, Andy and Pepper Mogle, who lived in Wakulla County. They quickly became the child's primary caregivers. For nearly 4 years, Missy was raised in that home. It was her only stable environment. Her grandmother, Pepper, structured her routines. Her grandfather, Andy, prepared her favorite meals. She developed emotional bonds that helped her thrive. But while Missy was settling into childhood, her mother was drifting further away from it. In 2021, Chloe married Daniel Spencer, a man 12 years older with a history of volatility. Friends from Wakulla High School later said Chloe began changing after she met him. Once outgoing and connected to her family, she began isolating. Communication with her parents dropped off. Missy, once seen regularly at her grandparents' home, was now out of sight. Then in January 2024, a family court ruled that Chloe Mogle could formally resume custody of her daughter. It wasn't a case of legal rights being restored after removal, but rather a recognition of biological parental standing. From birth, Chloe had played a limited role in Missy's life, relying on her parents to raise the child. But after marrying Daniel Spencer and moving into a new home, she petitioned for full custody, claiming that her circumstances had stabilized. The court agreed. There was no formal objection filed by the grandparents and no prior legal termination of Chloe's rights. But what wasn't considered during the hearing would later prove critical. At the time of that custody transfer, Chloe's husband, Daniel Spencer, was out on bond from a recent arrest. He had been charged following a law enforcement operation, targeting individuals communicating with minors online. Despite this, the court placed no restrictions, conducted no home safety review, and did not formally evaluate Daniel's background before returning Missy to their care. No additional vetting was done. No follow-up inspections were scheduled. And without warning, Missy was taken from the only consistent environment she'd known and placed in a household already under scrutiny. In July 2024, a call was made to Florida's Child Protection Hotline. The caller reported a troubling claim, one that involved 5-year-old Missy and her stepfather, Daniel Spencer. According to official documents, Missy had spoken about behavior from Daniel that raised serious concerns. She was 5. Her words were simple, but the message was unmistakable. Daniel had a habit of touching Missy inappropriately. The Department of Children and Families launched a formal investigation. Law enforcement in Tallahassee was brought in. A case file was opened. Detectives documented Missy's statements. They made contact with the adults in the home. But within days, the momentum faded. By protocol, a home visit was conducted. Chloe Spencer, Missy's mother, told investigators that Daniel was no longer in contact with Missy. She claimed Missy had been moved to stay temporarily with a relative and assured them that supervision was in place. There were no visible injuries. No witnesses came forward. And Missy, due to her age, was not considered a strong enough source for legal action. The Tallahassee Police Department reviewed the case, but with no corroborating physical evidence, it was determined that the available information could not support charges. The DCF, in turn, closed the file. The report was marked as inconclusive. The case was shelved. But what made the outcome so critical was what it revealed about the structure of the system itself. There was no secondary review, no multi-agency coordination. The statement of a child, regardless of the risk it implied, was not enough to trigger emergency intervention. Daniel remained in the home. The case remained closed, and no monitoring or supervision was put in place. By the morning of May 19, 2025, Missy was quietly brought back to the house she should have never been returned to. At 7:44 a.m. on May 19, 2025, a call was placed to emergency services from a home in the Southwood community of Tallahassee. On the line was Daniel Spencer. Calm but measured, he told the dispatcher that 5-year-old Missy had become unresponsive. His explanation was brief. She had thrown what he called a tantrum, held her breath, and when he returned to check on her, she was no longer moving. He did not mention any fall, injury, or prior medical condition, just a breath-holding spell, followed by silence. According to Daniel, he had left the room intentionally. He said he believed she would calm herself down. When he returned minutes later and found her unresponsive, he claimed to have panicked and immediately called for help. Inside the home, as paramedics arrived, they found another adult already attempting resuscitation. That man was Robert Frabel, a member of the household and Daniel's relative. Frabel was performing CPR on Missy in the living room near the front entrance. Emergency medical technicians quickly took over. Missy was transported to Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare under full medical response protocol. Despite intervention efforts, she was passed away at 8:34 a.m. Police officers from the Tallahassee Police Department were dispatched to the residence as part of the protocol for any case involving an unresponsive child. Upon arrival, officers began documenting the scene. While the initial report described a breath-holding episode, investigators noted that the physical setting of the home did not align with the events as described. No immediate signs of medical emergency were visible in the areas Daniel referenced. Officers took photographs, began initial interviews, and most critically, collected several electronic items, including a digital storage card. That SD card had been used with an in-home recording system. When forensic investigators began reviewing the device, they discovered that a number of video files had been deleted just hours earlier. The deletion appeared intentional, not automatic. The files were time-stamped, and many of them coincided with the hours before the 911 call was made. The deletion attempt raised immediate red flags. Investigators requested expedited digital recovery. Within 24 hours, they began retrieving footage that would completely reframe the investigation. What had started as a call about an unresponsive child now pointed to something else, something far more deliberate. The recordings captured over several weeks provided a view into the private life of the household. The footage showed Missy in her bedroom, alone, isolated, and often in vulnerable positions. In some segments, she appeared to have her arms and legs restricted in ways that raised immediate concern. In others, she was seen lying motionless while objects were placed over her. Investigators flagged these clips as critical to understanding what had happened and why Daniel Spencer's initial account conflicted so sharply with the evidence. The presence of both adults was confirmed in the footage. Daniel Spencer appeared on multiple occasions. In one clip, he adjusted objects near the child's bed. In another, he stood silently over her without engaging or offering any visible care. His demeanor was distant, his actions methodical. Chloe Spencer also appeared in the recovered footage. In one clip, she entered the room while Missy remained curled up on the mattress. In her hand was an object later identified by police as a household shoe. Her posture, her position, and her proximity to the child were documented clearly. Neither adult reported any of this activity during their initial interviews with investigators. Digital analysts examined the footage frame by frame. The content aligned with recordings from the evening prior to the 911 call and the early morning hours of May 19th. Importantly, investigators confirmed the files had been intentionally erased shortly before emergency responders were contacted. The autopsy report, completed days later, added further clarity. Medical staff noted indicators across multiple areas of the body, marks in various stages of healing, signs of prolonged nutritional neglect, and physical impressions consistent with repeated pressure. The medical examiner did not cite a single fatal cause, but concluded that the condition was consistent with sustained harm over a period of time. These findings, taken together, digital, physical, and behavioral, formed a picture that no longer resembled a medical emergency. It resembled a timeline, one that built slowly, silently, and without intervention, until it could no longer be ignored. On May 27, 2025, just over a week after the 911 call that prompted the initial investigation, formal charges were filed against both Daniel Spencer and Chloe Mogle. The charges came from the state attorney's office in Florida's Second Judicial Circuit, following an evidence-led review involving law enforcement, digital forensic specialists, and prosecutors. Each individual was charged with 4 felony offenses: second-degree murder, aggravated battery involving a minor, gross neglect, and failure to report endangerment. These charges pointed not to a single incident, but to a pattern of risk and oversight that authorities believed had gone unaddressed for far too long. The court ruled that neither Daniel nor Chloe would be released on bond. This decision was especially significant in Daniel Spencer's case. At the time of the incident, he was already under court supervision for a previous conviction stemming from an unrelated online sting. In that case, he had entered a guilty plea in April 2025, but sentencing had not yet occurred. Despite that status, he had remained in the home, a detail that would later draw public scrutiny. State Attorney Jack Campbell held a press briefing the day the charges were announced. He stated that, based on the timeline, had Daniel Spencer been in custody following his earlier conviction, the outcome of the May 19th emergency call might have been different. While careful not to speculate, Campbell's remarks underscored a broader concern. When supervision fails, consequences can follow. Following their arrest, both defendants were placed in separate detention facilities with strict conditions. They were prohibited from contacting one another, from engaging with witnesses, and from having access to minors, including their own children. The court ordered additional reviews before trial proceedings could begin. Chloe Mogle's initial hearing was scheduled for July 9th. Daniel Spencer's case management hearing was set for August 7th. Until those dates, some elements of the case remained sealed to protect sensitive material still under review. What began as a local investigation had now entered the courtroom, where the focus would shift from what had happened to how it was allowed to happen and what the system will do next. In the weeks that followed, the community surrounding Missy Mogle began to respond. What had started as a quiet case in the Southwood area of Tallahassee was no longer confined to courtrooms and legal briefings. It had begun to spread through neighborhoods, schools, and local congregations, places where people were asking the same question: how did this happen? 2 public memorials were held to honor her memory. The first took place at the Southwood Community Center, just a short distance from the home where Missy had lived. Dozens of residents gathered, parents, teachers, neighbors, all wearing pink and purple, her favorite colors. Children drew butterflies in chalk along the sidewalks. Soap bubbles were released into the air. There were no speeches, just quiet reflection. The second event was held at Pioneer Baptist Church in Crawfordville, the town where Missy had spent her early years with her grandparents. Organized by Jasmine Hartsfield, her godmother, and supported by community leaders. The gathering was intended as a tribute, but it quickly became a moment of resolve. A petition was launched in the days after. Its aim was focused: to strengthen review procedures before placing children in homes where adults have prior legal concerns involving minors. The proposal called for more consistent background checks, closer coordination between state agencies, and accountability in custody decisions. Within days, the petition had gathered hundreds of signatures. No official policy changes had been enacted at that point, but multiple agencies began internal reviews. Meetings were scheduled, files were reopened. Behind the scenes, institutions were asking themselves whether the system had done enough and what would be required to make sure it never failed in the same way again. What happened in this case wasn't a single failure. It was a pattern: missed signs, delayed action, and systems that didn't speak to each other. Missy's story revealed what was missing long before the crisis came, and that makes what happens next even more important. Prevention starts early. It begins with courts that take every concern seriously, with schools trained to notice the subtle signs, and with communities that stay alert, even when nothing looks obviously wrong. There are steps that matter. First, agencies must share what they know. When systems don't connect, risks get lost. This case made that clear. Second, professionals need the tools to understand young voices. A child may not say it perfectly, but they often say enough if someone's listening. Third, caregivers play a key role. Keep records, dates, comments, small details. They all matter when it's time to step forward. Fourth, help kids know who they can trust. Make safety a conversation, not a reaction. And finally, don't wait for a crisis to bring action. Host awareness nights. Encourage parent training. Bring these conversations into schools before the headlines arrive. This case was not simply about what went wrong. It was about multiple points where the safety net was too thin or missing altogether. And unless reforms are made, the risks remain. Missy's life reflected the potential every child carries. Her story can still serve a purpose. It can change how we listen, it can reshape how we act, and it can drive a wider culture of protection before crisis takes root. If you believe stories like this matter, help us share them. Each share could lead someone to speak up and also raise awareness. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Join others committed to building a safer, more responsive system for children everywhere. In memory of Missy, a child whose voice deserves to be heard long after the silence.